Salam, everyone. Welcome to the Samovar Network. My name is Reza. The Samovar Network, as you probably will know since you're tuning in, is a monthly panel discussion amongst Afghan Americans, working Afghan Americans in the diaspora, to discuss issues that are related to our community. Today's issue is titled, discussion is titled The Divine Divide. We're here to discuss what it means to be Afghan, what it means to be Muslim, or not so much a practicing Muslim, and really dig into what these labels mean and how they interact with each other. Before we introduce our amazing panel of guests, I want to make note of the fact that we do not have some members of the Afghan community who represent the truly vibrant nature of Afghans who are of a faith. And specifically, we don't have Afghans who are straight atheists. And for that, we are sorry, and we want to hear your opinions, and we want to amplify your voices. And so this is not going to be the end of the conversation. We will be having more conversations centered around faith and being Afghan, or specifically lack of faith and being Afghan in the future. And so if you are interested in being part of those conversations, please contact us on our Facebook page, also at our website. Both can be found by just typing in the Samovar Network into Facebook search or into Google. And I also want to make special note of the fact that we don't have any Afghan Christians or Afghan Hindus or Afghan Buddhists or Afghan Jews who are on this panel, who also represent a specific way of being Afghan that is not often recognized, but we here at the Samovar Network want to recognize that they exist and that we want to hear their voices. And that is why we are hopefully going to be able to do more panels like these in the future featuring their voices. All right, I said voices enough. So again, like I said, my name is Reza. I'm currently a medical student in New Hampshire. And for the purposes of the discussion, I identify myself as a practicing Muslim. And so what that means is we'll get into it. But I want to introduce some of the other panelists. Nur, could you go ahead, please introduce yourself?
Salam, my name is Nura, and I'm calling in from my home state of Ohio. I'm a PhD candidate in political science, and I identify as a practicing Muslim.
Hi, I'm Mitra. I am from Virginia in Boston currently, and I would consider my religious identity to be non-practicing Muslim. Strong connection with God, but not so much with the day-to-day of Islamic traditions.
How's it going? I'm Dawood, calling in from Orange County, California. I identify as non-practicing, and I sometimes struggle with calling myself Muslim.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Qais. I live in Minneapolis, Twin Cities, and I'm a practicing Muslim. I grew up in Afghanistan, and I've been living in the US for the past 8 years.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. Mitra, you mentioned something about the day-to-day, and I was wondering if you could give an example of what is like day-to-day Muslimness, and how is it that you maybe don't practice it or do practice it?
Yeah, sure. So I guess what I meant by that is that when I think of who I am, I can't think that Muslim is always a part of that. And when I look back upon my memories and what I was growing up, that was always involved a part of Muslim identity. I went to the Muslim school at the mosque. I fasted every month, every year. And not even, in my interactions with people, I defended Islam, explained things about Islam, and promoted Islam quite a bit. But when I think about my day-to-day now, it's, I think strongly about my connection with Khuda. That's kind of how I identify mostly, is with Khuda. But I don't pray 5 times a day. I don't read the Quran regularly or really much at all. I don't fast always. You know, sometimes I do, but I think that that's more of a practicing a tradition the way I do it, rather than observing a religious act.
And thank you for sharing that. I think it's an important question to ask about what those day-to-day routines are, because it's so easy for us to say, oh, I'm a practicing Muslim, or I'm a non-practicing Muslim, and then like leave it as that nebulous idea. But to give it sort of specific examples helps the viewers and us really sort of figure out like what do we mean by that. And then Diz, you mentioned in your intro that you struggle with these labels, and I wanted to ask you to sort of dive into a little bit more and give us like an example of what you mean by that struggle.
Yeah. So for me, it's weird. So like I'll defend Islam to anyone who's not Muslim, like left and right. Like if someone says something about Muslims or says something about Islam that I know to be incorrect or insensitive, I'll call them on it, right? And like I'll say that I'm a Muslim and I can speak from experience. But for me, it's hard to say that I'm a Muslim because I don't pray. I don't pray at all. I don't fast. I drink. Like the only thing I don't do is eat pork. So it's like, am I really a Muslim? Am I not? Like I believe in God, right? So that's my struggle. Is like I believe there is a God, right? And I want to believe that, you know, like Muhammad is the prophet, but I still struggle because I can't prove it, right? So for me, it's tough because I want clear answers and I can't really find clear answers. So that's why I struggle with calling myself a Muslim, although I identify to other people that are non-Muslim.
For sure. And I think a lot of people have that same sort of struggle that about like, you know, proving to themselves that Islam is like a real thing, or that it's like something's correct. Yeah, Mitra, you have something to say, please.
Yeah, sure. Definitely wanted to just kind of piggyback off of what Diz was saying. Probably a turning point for myself and my religious identity came from my relationship with my current husband, and trying to decide what was right and what was wrong religiously, and looking for those answers in religion and not finding what I was searching for, not finding the guidance that could help me reach the balance between my family and my path in life. And also in that situation, I started to question everything I had been taught to believe. You know, don't drink alcohol, don't eat pork. And I thought to myself, I believe all these things and I strongly believe them, but why? Why do I believe them? What's my reason? And I realized I didn't really have a good one for most of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for sharing that. No, I think these are things that, again, like other people are struggling with, and they give us sort of a specific way of talking about this sort of stuff. And then, yeah, Kais, please.
I think just the discussions that Mitra and Dawood brought up is very interesting because it shows the diversity within the Muslim Afghan community or the general Afghan community, because there are a lot of young Afghans who reinterpret Islam, and Islam is open to reinterpretations and discussions, because the base of Islam started in that sense of discussions and conversations. And a lot of times, if you compare the Islam in the US versus Islam in Afghanistan, it's a hybrid and also very fluid religion, because people have taken certain things that suits them and also have left certain things that bothers them or doesn't make sense to them. And that in itself is the beauty of Islam, because if you can take a lot of things that helps you in your life, in your daily struggles, and that's a lot of times a main struggle also to talk to your parents or talk to our elders and explain that to them, because Islam is very rigid in that sense.
Yeah, I think that, can y'all hear me? So for me, it's different because I think from an early age, I felt a connection to every morning when I wake up and I go outside, I put the scarf on, the hijab. And so for me, it's a very intentional act. I feel like every morning when I wake up, I renew my decision to be Muslim because I don't wear this hijab in Turkey or in a Muslim majority country. I'm in like the boonies of Ohio or North Carolina where I'm often one of the only Muslims and a visible Muslim. So I don't think I went into it to intentionally remind myself every day, but I think I've remained committed to being Muslim because of the sort of the physical part of it attaches to my spiritual part in a really interesting way, and it doesn't look the same now than it did when I first decided to wear it. But I think it is that my sense of practice manifests in a physical form, and that's not the same for all women who wear the hijab. But just for me personally, that's where I see the connection being. Is that for me, it's a reminder of God in everything I do because I do it in a space where I'm one of the only ones that does it. So I don't think it makes me special, but I think that that's how I run through my personal connection and sometimes in good ways and sometimes in very strong, like challenging ways. It's not always an easy thing to like process.
I hear that. And I want to sort of connect this back to our Afghan identities, right? And sort of ask in what spaces do our lack of practicing faith or our practicing faith intersect, right, with being Afghan? Because for me, with my Afghan family, both my parents are Afghan. Going to the Eid prayer was normal. Not having bacon in our fridge was normal. And in a lot of ways, these things sort of built up not just a Muslim identity, but also an Afghan identity for myself. And so how have and let's start with your families, right? How have your families reacted to your lack of practicing or the fact that you practice? And I'm going to go to Diz for this question.
Yeah, so for me, I grew up with a religious mother. If I give you guys a tour of my where I'm at right now, you'll see like 2 of these things, a couple more like Allahs and random Qurans just scattered everywhere. So for me, it was like growing up, like, yeah, like my mom took me to the masjid. My mom made me go to Eid prayer, but I think that's what kind of turned me a little bit away from it, is because I was so like into it so much. And when the family sees that, right, because like I'll be with them and they want to go to prayers and I don't go, they kind of like look down on it. So that's how it interacts with my family. They're not a fan of me not practicing the way that they practice.
And Nura, with you having to, wear the chadar every day, is there a specific reaction that your family gives you with wearing it, especially nowadays with the way things are? Our current president hates us. A lot of politicians also don't like us and are on that bandwagon. How does your family feel with you expressing your faith the way that you do?
So it's complicated. Let's put it that way. Me wearing hijab it was overdoing it. I was supposed to be a good girl, and then I kind of crossed the line of, okay, like, where is this going? So it wasn't, and it's interesting because I've talked to other women who wear the hijab in Afghan communities, and I thought I was the only one that had that expression where my immediate family, like my mom, my family, like they're pretty it didn't faze them because I live Islam in America in Ohio, and within my Ohio context, I come from the oldest Muslim community in Ohio. But in my Afghan context, when I would go to my Afghan context in Fremont in California, when I first came wearing the hijab, it was like, what the heck is she doing? Like, all a Talib shidin? Like, are you now part of the Taliban? That was like literally the reaction. And even to this day, it's sort of like I was regressing to them, right? Like, and so I grew up seeing my hijab and my Islam associated with being from Ohio and being American. I didn't see me being Muslim as being attached to being Afghan. I almost felt like these bipolar identities. For me, being Muslim was being American. It wasn't being Afghan. So it's really like, I know, I recognize that that's not the case for other individuals, but for me, it was very much disconnected, where being Afghan meant something else because I crossed the line and I sort of like went too far for a lot of people.
And that's a really interesting point that you pick up. And I want to go to Kais and ask you, I mean, Noura just said that being Muslim was being associated with being American. And I was wondering if this sort of separation of identities existed in Afghanistan while you were living there. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Is that good? Okay.
Yeah.
So in Afghanistan, since everybody is considered Afghan, so that never comes up in conversations. Like, you are Afghan, that's granted, and there's no question. But your Muslim identity is continuously questioned. How much you practice, in what spaces you practice, in what spaces you don't practice. So, and that is also depends on what circles of friends and community you are surrounded. So I actually came with the question of being an Afghan and being Muslim and all these like different multiple identities in the US when I moved 8 years ago, because I wasn't used to considering myself Afghan because I thought that doesn't matter at all. But Muslim was a very integral and important aspect of it until I came to the US. And then it was, to me, very important to be Afghan and then Muslim. But right now, the problem with my family is that the problem they have with me is that they think by moving to the US, I've left my Islam behind. So I started even practicing Islam even more, and also sending proofs to them that I've actually, like, I didn't have to go to Taraweeh prayers during Ramadan every single night to the mosque. And when I moved here, I started going even more, because then they would keep checking on me whether I'm actually closer, because the immediate question was, when you're going to the US, you're not going to practice Islam. You're leaving that behind.
Wow.
So it's like, and even in spaces when I am here surrounded by Afghan Americans, since I came recently, then the immediate perception is that I am very practicing since I moved from Afghanistan. So there's like continuous conflict that for my family, I'm not that practicing. For Afghan Americans here, I'm really too practicing. So,
Wow.
So you caught in a rock and a hard place, kind of.
Yep.
And having to send selfies of you at masjid every day to your family. That
yeah. Well,
practicing.
I had to block them on Facebook. So
Yeah. Use Dawood's background.
Yeah. Talk to his mom about where she got all of her plaques. And I think that segues into the next like set of people that are important in our lives. Our friends, right? Our Afghan friends and our non-Afghan friends. And I kind of want to hear from you guys, and I want to hear from Mitra right now. How do your Afghan friends or your non-Afghan friends sort of react to you being practicing or not practicing, and where does that intersect?
Honestly, from both friends and family in the Afghan community that I was a part of, it was very kind of open-minded. As long as you were somewhere in the middle, it was open-minded. So if you were very, very religious or very, very not religious, then that was uncomfortable. But if you fell in the middle somewhere in that spectrum, then that was okay. That was something that people could be all right with. Friends, as far as non-Afghan friends, mostly like Christian or atheist, agnostic people that were American background. Those people, when I was much more practicing and more heavily involved in Islam, I had an interesting experience. People trying to be very nice, but tiptoeing in a way, like trying to protect me from my own beliefs. Like if I didn't, I don't drink alcohol, then they would say like, oh, no, don't have this tiramisu. Like there's alcohol in this. And I'm like, let me just judge for myself. I'm a grown woman. I can decide what I can and can't do based on my religion. But I noticed that that was definitely something that people that were non-Muslim, non-Afghans had trouble with, was just trying to decide where the boundary was and what was okay and what wasn't okay.
So, Mitra, you grew up in Virginia, as did I, but I had a different experience there with like the Afghans that I grew up with. So they were a little bit more conservative, and like they weren't fully like all out practicing it. They weren't at the masjid 5 times a day, but they did pray a lot more, right? And they would go to like Tarawih prayer, and they were more critical of things that you did from a religious like aspect, like don't do that, it's haram. But then I moved to Southern California. Now that I'm in Orange County, it's a very different community. So my friends don't go to the masjid. Like the only times I'll ever see them at a masjid is during a funeral. And even then they sit outside the masjid. They don't go in. And then like afterwards they'll go and talk to the families to show that they were there. But so it's been a different experience for like my Afghan friends, especially out there and here, because like when I came over here, I didn't expect that. I didn't know that was normal, like out here in SoCal, for people to not go to prayers and not do that. With Americans, it's a little different. So I get ridiculed for it. So because I don't eat pork, right? Like it's just something I grew up not doing, so I don't do it. And I have like my friends will like put bacon in my face, like it smells so good, just eat it, dude. But like they try to tease you because of it, which is a little weird. And like somehow I'm the authority on Islam to them. So like if something happens, like why do Muslims do this? Or what do Muslims think about this? Like somehow I'm the religious scholar, which is really weird, but it's, you know, it's just kind of fun because I could tell them anything and they'll believe me. So I love that part of it.
Yeah, definitely. No, you're totally right. Because when I lived in LA, I noticed all the same things. A lot more alcohol free flowing in Southern California compared to Northern Virginia. But another thing that I noticed kind of that actually played a strong role in probably how much I identified personally as a Muslim versus an Afghan was my experience in the mosque growing up. I remember so many times going to like we had a little Saturday school, like my mosque's version of Bible study. And I would go there and it was like I was the kid in the corner with the dunce cap because I didn't follow the practices the same way or to the same style as the Arabs. The mosque that I went to was mostly Arabs. And it was a whole different type of Islam than I had ever experienced before going there. And it made me realize that that wasn't as much a part of who I was. And the Afghan part was a lot stronger. And that probably was actually the first time I realized there was a difference even between Islam and being Afghan. As a kid, it was all one thing. So I think going to the mosque, we were treated, my family and the very few other Afghans that went to that mosque, we were treated like the tourist Afghan or the tourist Muslims of the mosque. Like they tolerated us, they let us hang, but we had our little corner. And I don't know what you guys' experiences were with mosques. Definitely probably different when you're at one that is more Afghan heavy than mine was.
Well, I'm glad that Mitra brought a very interesting point in reference to the mosque and feeling that child in the corner and alienated. And that's very similar interaction I have had. Since I moved here, I started going to the mosque even more, as I said, to prove to everyone that I'm actually keeping close to my religion. But then the moment that the question was like, where are you from? It was Afghanistan. I just felt very discriminated in many ways because I was considered not Muslim enough because I was Afghan. And then that's when I actually realized the hierarchy that exists within Islam and among Muslims, and also the Arab supremacy that have been around the region and also even among the diaspora communities that we most of the time don't talk about, which I have brought it up with my a lot of my Arab friends, and that there's so much racial, nationality, and class, and all that, those discriminations, that we don't talk about it. And a lot of times even I don't feel comfortable anymore going to the mosque, because I know that Midwest is mostly influenced by Arab community. And to them, I have to like continuously prove that I am as Muslim as you are, because for them, the association is with us, either with Pakistanis or continuously with Iranians, because they're like, oh, Iranians are not a lot practicing, so you guys are Persian or you're Pakistani. So it's like we are in the middle. So that, like, a lot of times ends up as discriminatory.
And I just want to amplify your point and really like sort of dig into what you're saying, that I see that too. And it's not just at masjids, I see it at MSAs too. When I was at the MSA in college, there was definitely this sort of hierarchy between who understood Islam better. And, you know, Afghans were like at the bottom of that hierarchy. And people who could speak Arabic, you know, people who had connection with the Hafizes, they were at the top of it. And it sort of blocked my ability to participate in community events in the way that I wanted to, because I feel like I do know a little bit about Islam, more than the average Joe. And it sort of sucked to have that sort of block just because my parents are from Afghanistan. But Noor, I know you wanted to say something and add on to.
Yeah, I think I have a different experience, and I think it's because I come from a third. My mosque was founded in Ohio in 1908. So I went to mosque the third generation of Lebanese Americans. So the future of what mosques in other states will be. So in the community, so I really have a romantic upbringing with mosque, because the community was not welcome to Afghans. They saw us as Jews. The Arab community was like mixed classes, where we were very well. And what we would do when we'd walk in as a 12-year-old at the mosque was hang out, listen to music, and grab Krispy Kreme down the street. So when I went to the mosque, I didn't actually have to do mosque things. We would just go. And so our parents would just bring us there so that it was a safe space to hang out. And I've realized going to mosques in Fremont, where like there's a barrier between me seeing the imam as a woman, that had I had that experience where I walked in the mosque and as a girl, if I wasn't able to see the imam, I think I would have had a different relationship with Islam. Whereas my mosque, there's a barrier where the men are on the right-hand side and the women are on the left-hand side, and there's a barrier that goes up to your hips, so I can see them visibly and I pray next to them. And then at the other mosque, I pray right behind them. There's no barrier. So the two mosques in Toledo like gave me a pretty romantic, it was like the golden era. So I know that it looks different, but I want to push back to say that not all Arabs are as horrible as they can be, or as Afghans can be. That and the person that reminded me of Afghans' contributions to Arabic and Islam was the Sudanese imam. Like, I didn't really realize how much Afghans contributed to Islamic scholarship or Arab scholarship until the Sudanese imam was like, Nura, like, do you know the history of, and started like name dropping all these imams, like, they're all Afghan, like, don't you know your heritage? And I only learned, like, kind of came to terms with that, like, connection between like being Muslim and being Afghan when I was about 21 years old. And like, so, and when I was an adult. And that happened because like an Arab imam was like pushing me to sort of really make those connections for myself. So I just wanted to offer that.
Hashtag not all Arabs. Okay.
See, my experience is different. I grew up in an Afghan masjid in Virginia, in like Annandale, Virginia. We had the Mustafa Center, which was primarily Afghans. So it was a little different because like you had to, and Ali asked the question, like, what role does the expectation of model Muslim from co-religionists versus non-Muslims play, you know? So to this tension. So for me, like, in front of other like Muslims and other Afghans, sometimes you have to play it up. And I know you have to play up your Muslimness. And we asked this on the poll, like, you know, like I'll say words like inshallah or like bakhair or like mashallah. Like I don't ever use those words, but I'll have to use them in front of other like Muslims because they get offended if I don't. Like I'm like, oh, your baby's really cute. And they're like, say mashallah, like, you know, like, so she doesn't get nazarad or something. And then with the role of being a Muslim to like non-Muslims, they want to see you as like the good Muslim, right? Like it's such a pain in the ass. Like why do we have to be a certain way for it to be good in your eyes, right? Like I got asked a question when I was at work during like right before the election like, by a Trump supporter asking me like, so because he asked why I wasn't voting for Trump, and I was like, well, because he doesn't like my people, right? And they're like, well, do you want to kill Jews? I was like, no. He's like, do you think that we should have Sharia law in America? I'm like, no. And he's like, see, you're one of the good Muslims. And I'm like, what the hell does that even mean? Like, you know, like we have to play up to this experience of being a good Muslim to them. You know, like you could be accepted if you do more of like what people here do, or like it's the weirdest thing. Like you got to kind of play down your religiousness to white people, but play it up to your fellow brown people, at least in my experience.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, and for sort of diving into the kind of different pressures that we get from people who are Muslim and people who are non-Muslim to express like our Muslimness. And you talked about being a good Muslim, and I wanted to ask if being a good Muslim, and I'm coming to you, Kais, for this, if being a good Muslim was equated to being a good Afghan. Like, were in the places that you grew up, were being a good Muslim and being a good Afghan sort of like made to be the same thing?
Well, I came to know about good Muslim, bad Muslim, like honestly, when I moved to the US, or when I started studying politics, because the essence of it comes from like, it has a lot of cultural connotation and as well as like political, because it has a lot like a political history of like who's a good Muslim. Like though John was saying that if you speak like the language of Americans, like you cite them and say that, oh, I don't want Sharia law, then you're a good Muslim. With growing up in Afghanistan, the question was not being Afghan, you are an Afghan, but also the question was being a good Muslim. And that also throughout time changed, because I was born during the Russians and communists. And at that time, you had to be very nationalist. And that was the essence of your like identity. Versus later on, when the Islamic Revolution happened, when the changes, the war started, then the question was how good of a Muslim you are. A lot of people started buying Pirantunban, wearing the hat or pakol, and those all became signifiers of your religiosity, how good of a Muslim you are. So you will wear the pakol or the shawl that a lot of us wear on our shoulders. And when I moved to the US, it's completely changed, because for me, growing up in Afghanistan, and immediately when non-Americans hear my accent, immediately they ask me where I'm from, and I say from Afghanistan. And then I have to prove that I'm not only a good Muslim, but also a good Afghan, because Afghans have had, like I've been in the news since September 11, and so then it's like, you have to maintain both of that, which in Afghanistan you don't have to, because your Afghan identity is granted, and you are, no matter how much you criticize your Afghanness, your culture and all that, nobody is going to say that you're going to become American. But if, as a diaspora child, you criticize certain practices, traditional practices, immediately you're like, oh, you're not being Afghan, you want to be American. Whereas I don't have that. So I have the privilege of growing up in Afghanistan and then moving here. So my family is not so concerned that I'm going to leave my Afghan identity behind, but more so my religious identity, because I'm more surrounded with people who are not Muslim.
I think that's a fascinating difference between our experiences, because like that's one of the things that my parents worry about. Am I going to leave my Afghan identity behind? And they worry about whether or not I'm going to lose my Muslim identity behind. There's like a dual worry that they have. Sometimes they worry that I'm too Afghan. Yeah. Going to like the conferences that I have. So I think that's actually really cool that you bring that up, and how these experiences can be different. And then I wanted to sort of ask for Nura and Mitra, if being a good Muslim or being a good Afghan were equated with being like a good like woman, right? And like how were these kinds of I don't know, I'm holding my hands up like this. I don't know if these kinds of labels, right, of good Muslim, good Afghan, if they were connected with your femininity in any way, and whether or not you were like a good female. And so, and Mitra, yeah, go ahead, please.
Sure, yeah. Honestly, the thing that comes to mind for me first is my outward appearance. Because when it comes to male versus female, a practicing or non-practicing male in general day-to-day experiences in America doesn't have an outward symbol about whether or not they're doing so. So if it's hot outside and they wanted to wear shorts, then they wear shorts. It doesn't mean that they're choosing not to be Muslim. And if they go to the masjid, but they're not practicing, there's nothing about what they're wearing that says that outwardly. But for a woman, pretty much at any situation, if I go to the beach, if I go to the masjid, if I go to the park, whatever I do, what I'm wearing to a degree is a statement of how much I practice. So that's one of the things that I notice as kind of an immediate difference between practicing and non-practicing experiences for men versus women.
Yeah, I think gender complicates things. Like where with Mitra said, like we are sometimes the symbols of our family, and that's where the Afghanness comes. Where to be good, I think the convergence comes where getting a good being educated was fulfilling my role in honoring my family's hard work as Afghans. But I felt the same way as being Muslim. So in that way, being a good girl was minding my studies, right? But I also find it in gender interactions interesting, where if I have friends that are male, that's also policed in a way that I think is interesting. And I see it come up in Afghan spaces and in Muslim spaces in distinct ways that I think Mitra and I have talked about when it's come to the women's panel that TSN has. But those are some of the examples that come to mind.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So I wanted to take like a hard left and ask a more pointed question for each of the panelists. How do you think, or how have you seen atheists being received within the Afghan community? We've talked a lot about the sort of dominance of Islam within the Afghan community. And so with Islam, or with a religion being so dominant within the community, how is a distinct lack of belief in God received by people within the Afghan American diaspora, but also within Afghanistan itself? I'm curious to know which one of you is going to tackle this question first.
I nominate Diz because I kind of want to see. Diz, has anyone accused you of being an atheist? Accused.
Yeah, they have. Well, they didn't accuse me of it, but they've asked me if I am, right? It's like when you struggle with your religion, and like people, if people know that you struggle with your religion, right? They want to like help you try to find your religion, right? So a lot of the time, it's like people are like, "Are you sure you haven't read the right books? Are you sure you haven't seen the right scholars? Or are you just trying to avoid the information?" And like for me, it's like I still go to the masjid every now and then, right? Like if like my mom makes me go, I'll go, right? Or if there's like certain people that I like that are speakers that when I was at the masjid more frequently, like are speaking, I'll go because I want to support them. So it's not like I stay away from Islam completely, but you do get this like maybe there's something wrong with what you're doing. That's why you're lost in a sense, right? That's what you get accused of being, more so than like anything else, is that you're lost and that you need direction. When realistically, like I'm a grown man, if I if I felt like I was lost, I'm going to go and look for directions. I'm not too like proud to go on Google Maps and look to see where I need to go. But so it's just a weird, like, people want to help you if they feel like you don't know, or if you're not really religious. That's the biggest thing I get out of it.
And Kais, how is the reception of atheists within the Afghan community different between your different experiences living in Afghanistan and living here in America?
Well, in Afghanistan, I believe a lot of religious minorities or non-religious individuals have a really hard time to even express themselves or tell to even their closest friends that they are not Muslim. I've had friends who, after 2-3 years, they have told me that they're not Muslim, or they never even were Muslim. From childhood, they were either Jew or Baha'i, and those are minorities that are continuously being oppressed. In relation to atheism or even questioning Islam, I've had very close interactions with the imams in Afghanistan, because continuously, if you are in a wedding or a part like a Maimoni and all that, so there's always one or two self-proclaimed mullahs or imams that continuously want to like police your interaction or whatever you want to talk about, and mostly the conversations either about Islam or politics. And I asked one of the imams a few questions about Islam, especially about why women do not have the right to talaq somebody who they are not, or divorce somebody who they're not happy with. And also the question of like witness, that why continuously the interpretation is that there have to be 2 women or female witnesses versus 1 male witness in a lot of crimes. And just questioning itself put me on the spot, and his response was that you are a kafir, you are not Muslim anymore. And so that in itself like creates a major fear back home in Afghanistan for a lot of people to even question things, which I have seen it very differently in diaspora, because questioning is very encouraged. You question things, and it's you're taught in a different way how to question religion, culture, and all that. But in Afghanistan, the very immediate, short or simple questions can put you at risk of being alienated and considered atheist, which could end up in your death, and nobody wants to take that risk. So a lot of times I was even scared to question a lot of things that were a puzzle to me. So I had to learn Arabic and like find the answer to those questions within my own capacity.
And that's a really important point that you bring up. That even the implication of you being an atheist can result in not just your alienation, but also your death. And that's something that a lot of atheist Afghans struggle with in Afghanistan. But also, I think the alienation part, they definitely struggle with here as well. Nietzsche, I know you wanted to bring up a point.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to mention the fact that a lot of times with people that are clearly non-practicing or atheists in the Afghan community, I've noticed that the khalas, if you will, always treat it like just another like flaw, something to pity almost. Like, we bache, Sima John, Musliman nesta, like it's something that's almost the same as saying like, oh, he's got a learning defect or something. Like, it's okay. It's like a thing that we have to tolerate. Nobody talks about it. It's like a mar on that person. And I've noticed a lot of the older community kind of treats it that way. And if they don't treat it like that, if it's someone that's not a youth, then they treat it almost as if it's equivalent to being a communist. I've noticed a lot of the older men and women in our community that aren't practicing Muslims, that people will say, well, those people were communists.
So for me, like, I struggled like wanting to be on this panel, because I was afraid that like certain family members would see it, right? So when, like, I know in my family, if you get labeled as anything but a Muslim, a lot of the time they'll disown you. Like they don't believe that you're family anymore. So like it's tough to like actually be your true self around your family, with the implications of you not believing in the religion the way that they want you to believe in the religion. So like that's one of the struggles of being labeled as an atheist or an agnostic, is like you get disowned. It's a reality for a lot of people. And I think a lot of other Afghan Americans or other Afghans have been disowned or like had threats of violence because they didn't practice the way other people wanted them to practice.
Yeah, I think that it is seen as this weird like, why is it that it carries this weight, like to your saying, dude? I honestly have only come to terms with how bad it is and the privilege I hold in this space, because there's a lot of Afghans that I hold near and dear to my heart that are non-practicing Muslim or even atheist, and I trust them with my life. Dawood, your opinion means a lot to me, and I think it's something that a lot of people know. And I think outsiders would see that as weird. That why is someone that's so like visibly Muslim, like cool with gaining trust from someone that isn't, like, and there's this sort of like pitting of people that can kind of happen where like, oh, religious people are only supposed to hang out with religious people, and people who don't follow into that crew are supposed to do their own thing. And I think that it almost creates this weird polarizing effect even amongst our generation that I always grapple with, because I'm like, people that I trust with my life, with my, who I introduced to my brothers, aren't necessarily of the same religious persuasion that I am. And I've found that makes me a better person, but I find that other people are threatened by it, and other Muslims will sometimes comment on it. And I think it speaks to what you and Mitra brought up, what Dawood and Mitra brought up.
Yeah, and I think discussing these, I mean, even though there isn't, unfortunately, an atheist on the panel tonight, discussing and acknowledging the lack of privileges that someone who identifies as atheist has within the Afghan American diaspora and within Afghanistan is important, because that's, again, the sort of mission of TSN, to amplify those voices and make sure that they're somewhat heard. Mitra, I know that before the conversation, we talked about, or before this discussion, we talked about forced religious observances. And I kind of wanted you to talk a little bit about that and sort of explain your ideas with that specific example that you brought up.
Definitely. In many different experiences throughout my life, be it just going to a conservative person's house for a Mimoni or gathering, or going to something more important like a funeral, for instance, at every single one of those events, it becomes a battle for some people about how much observation of Muslim culture or Muslim practices is necessary to be respectful. And that's something that's always been debated. So going to someone's house for a Maimoni, much less serious, much more casual type thing. And definitely have noticed people, many different people, cousins, friends, that think just because I'm going to someone conservative's house doesn't mean I have to look like I'm conservative too. I don't have to wear a hijab, for example, or whatever. That's, something that is an individual decision. Just because you're going to someone's house and that's what they believe doesn't mean that you have to demonstrate the same belief. And then at the same time, when going to something like a funeral, what's right there? Are you being disrespectful if you go to a masjid and you're wearing short sleeves? Or is that something that, is a personal decision, and you're going there just to pay your respects to someone and has nothing to do with whether or not you're wearing the short sleeves there? So I think that that's something that, I guess in America, you have a little bit more luxury to do, to put up that fight and to say, I'm going to make this a big deal, whether or not I wear sleeves at this event,
And I think one of the biggest deals that comes up is alcohol, right? This is something that I've seen happen in my own family, and I think
You went there.
yeah, I mean, Nora brought it up before the conversation with alcohol, and I think she brought it up for a reason, because it's sort of the issue of alcohol is like one of the biggest symbols of like whether you are Muslim or not Muslim, practicing or not practicing, at least in America. And for my family, it's sort of weird. We kind of have like the opposite reaction to alcohol that other families I've seen have. On my dad's side, there has been drinking going on for all of my life. It's not something new. It's something that my khalas and kakas all did, and you know, their children did it too, and my family didn't, right? And my mom came from a very religious family, and she never like drank in her life, and a lot of them haven't drank in their life. And so now that I'm 27 years old, God, my cousins, when I'm at a wedding, they see me not drinking, and they're like, "Oh, you're still doing that, right? You're still not drinking, and why are you doing that? You know, you're so Muslim, right?" And they say it in like, it's sort of like a teasing way, but it's also like that teasing that your cousins do, and they want to kind of judge you too, to your face. And so that's how I've always experienced like alcohol in these public spaces and how it interacts with my Muslim identity. But I wanted to know how it interacts for you guys. And I mean, Diz, I'm heading to you for this.
Oh, you would go to me for this, huh? Jackass.
Shots fired.
So it's weird. So my dad's family is very conservative, right? So they don't drink at all. My mom's side of the family, it's kind of a mixed bag, right? Like you have your conservatives and then ones who aren't, right? And a lot of my uncles and stuff do drink. But like it's weird. Like when my dad's family like sees someone drinking, like to them it's the most like one of the most un-Islamic things you could do, right? Like it's just like, that person, how dare they like drink at this wedding, like are like they don't care about being Muslim and blah 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 blah. So it's like I don't understand like why that matters, right? Like you could be a practicing Muslim and drink, right? Like your faith is between you and God. It's not between like what other people think your faith should be. Like if you choose to drink, you choose to drink. It doesn't mean you're less of a Muslim than somebody else, or you're more of a Muslim than somebody else because you don't drink. And it's just annoying being like seeing that from family members that like, oh, you know, like that's a common expression that you hear, which I don't understand why alcohol is the threshold. I always thought pork was the threshold, but I guess in some families alcohol is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that you said. That's pretty similar to my experiences as well. I think that there's a lot of kind of sensitivity when it comes to alcohol, just in that discussing it or drinking it or being a part of that lifestyle, whether or not you identify as a Muslim, doing that around Muslims can sometimes be seen as just an unfair practice to drink in front of another Muslim, or to be in an environment, say a wedding, that has alcohol flowing at it, is something that can be, you know, some people wonder, is that something that's not good? Should you even have events where some people are drinking and some aren't, and some are observing that practice and some aren't? So I think that that's something that is something I noticed at my own wedding, where there was alcohol flowing and there was the option, and there were people who were very grateful for it, because in the way that Afghans generally practice Islam, I feel like when it comes to alcohol, it's almost like a Catholic thing where it's like a secret sin and you have to hide in the back and you drink in the parking lot. And there's a lot of
cousins at weddings take union breaks to drink their alcohol. So I hear that. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's very simple. It makes me think of the Catholic practice, because there's a lot of guilt with it. Even the people who consider themselves very strongly religious, if they partake in alcohol at all, that is the thing that they're like, well, that's my sin, that's my vice, that's what I'm gonna have to, you know, cope for. But it's an interesting thing, because that seems to be the thing that people are willing to sin for, and then just bear with the guilt.
Just to add on that, I believe that communal spaces, like be it money or a family function or even a masjid or an MSA, Muslim Student Association, or even a club, these all could be sites that mostly identities are empowered, but at the same time that identities are also oppressed, because as we are saying that in certain spaces, when you drink alcohol, you are like, you're considered like not Muslim, you are considered a bad Muslim. And for me, as a practicing Muslim who doesn't drink alcohol and who have lived here for many years, sometimes I see the opposite. Whenever I'm hanging out with Afghans who drink or with Muslims who drink, they immediately question my faith, that, oh, like, you've been here for so long, why are you so pasrafta, why are you so deity, or why are you so like fob that you still don't drink? And that immediately becomes like as a sign of class, or as a sign of forms of these privileges that you need to claim to when you want to be American. And to me, it's that I also, just like Dawood and Mitra John was talking about these judgments and oppressions, I have faced the opposite of that. Like among people who drink, then they also judge those who don't drink.
Yeah, I've never felt so nerdy as when with Muslims who drank didn't ask you, you're like, and I was like, yeah, that's religion. So like there's that class distinct to it, so it complicates what I mean. Being Afghan in Kabul in the 1960s, it was, you know, something that people did amongst a subset of people in the city at that time. And some people want to romanticize that era, and if you're not in it, it means that I was kind of treated as being backwards for not engaging in it. But there's also this thing where some people think that just talking about alcohol, we're promoting consumption. How do we feel about that line of thought? That's something that has been said to me privately, which I find interesting, given that alcohol was permitted for Muslims. And if you look at Islamic history, I'm not a historian, and Qais and Ali, like, people please fact check me, but it was slowly abolished from the tradition. It was not like, you know, the Prophet, peace be upon him, like rolled in and was like, yo, don't do this. And so I find this attachment to alcohol, rather than like an attachment to being a good person or a character, there's more of an obsession with the physical acts of presenting as Muslim than the internal acts of how we are to one another as human beings and meeting people where they're at. Popcorn Mitra.
Thanks, Nura. I think to your question about, is even talking about this, you know, promoting it, I think the answer is no, but it's up for debate, obviously. That's why we're here. But I feel like when it comes to anything in religion, alcohol, eating pork, having sex, whatever, everything in religion, every aspect that religion touches, it's a never-ending question. And whatever side of the coin you're on, if you treat it like that's the answer, then you're losing the point of it, in that there is no answer. There's an ongoing question, and every time somebody takes the mic, the answer is different. And so discussing alcohol, discussing any of these things is not propaganda or, you know, conversion tactics. It's just discussion. It's being informed. And that if the belief is there to not drink, then talking about it isn't going to change that.
Just to second Mitra, I think Quran itself has discussed alcohol. So to a lot of conservative Muslims or Afghans who think that discussing alcohol in itself is haram or it's a propaganda, we shouldn't do it. The answer is that Islam itself or Quran discusses it openly whether you should do it or not. And then also that if you look at history of it, it was not banned during Prophet Muhammad's time. It was when the second caliphate, Umar Farouk, couldn't make it to the prayer to the Jama'at. That's when it became banned. So if you look at it from like until that point, like you said, it was still allowed. So Muslims were still drinking. And the drinking itself comes from, like in Quran, there's so many verses about it. It's similar to other taboo topics that a lot of Afghans want to run away from or not talk about it, because not talking about it as if it solves the issue. It doesn't. Drugs, alcohol, a lot of gender disparities, discrimination, a lot of judgments, a lot of issues that are so, or even hierarchies and power within the Afghan community when it comes of ethnicity, language, and all that. So all of those need to be discussed so openly so we can actually come to certain conclusions or come to certain understandings and respect each other more, just like human beings.
I really love that you said that we need to discuss these different aspects of, especially Islam, but also I think it's important to discuss the aspects of our Afghan culture openly, right? And one of those aspects of Afghan culture that I think is not discussed openly at all and is still used as a signifier of whether you're Muslim or not is sex. And whether or not you've had sex before marriage or after marriage or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And I think this is a question from one of our audience members, and I'm not sure if he wants to be identified. So we'll just leave it as there's an audience member who asked this question. Are you still considered Muslim if you have had sex before marriage? And I want to go to, Diz seems to be laughing the most at this question. So go ahead, you 11-year-old, please.
No, I'm laughing because I knew you're gonna popcorn me for this. So anything with vices, you come straight to me.
I literally only did it because you were laughing, but yeah, I mean that's not unfair. That's true. That's pretty fair.
Yeah, who gets to decide whether you're Muslim or not? Like that's what baffles me, right? We keep asking, like, are you still Muslim if you drink? Are you still Muslim if you have sex? Are you still Muslim if you eat pork? Are you still Muslim if
I think Diz cut out. Oh man, he was on such a roll too.
His family cut off his internet.
Yeah, his family saw that he was talking about sex in public, so they're just like, nope. Nura or Mitra, you want to go?
The only thing I was going to add is that the Center for Muslim Life at Duke has been having this debate of whether or not to have condoms in their office. And there is a post, so we can put it on the Facebook page, about a Muslim girl and her struggles to receive an abortion. And so the reality is that these things exist, there's complications, and I don't know, please don't mind university's Muslim Life Center, but just know that a public question they've been grappling with is like, if we have it there, what does it say? Are we promoting sex amongst our Muslim students, or are we being preventative? So in that sense, maybe Mitra can speak on like the public health medical aspect. That's the most recent thing that's come up in my Muslim circle, is like, how do we grapple with this within our community?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of ties in with the question of, are we allowed to talk about alcohol, or is talking about it promoting it? And I feel like this might be a question that we're dealing with in Islam and in the Afghan community now, but it's been a question that many communities have dealt with for many years. And honestly, when things aren't talked about, studies have shown that you have higher rates of STDs, higher rates of unplanned pregnancies, and other things like that. I mean, culturally, of course, there's a difference between growing up in America and growing up in Afghanistan, and the amount of consequence that comes with certain activities is greater in different places. But within the Afghan American community, for sure, not talking about it just leads to people being educated through other sources. And if we want to build a narrative, or, you know, as an Islamic organization, if there's a narrative to be built, then it should be. So otherwise, those people who are looking for those answers are going to search somewhere else.
Diz, it's good to see that you're alive and that your family didn't kill you for talking about sex on air. Did you want to finish your thought?
Yeah, where did it cut me off at?
You were saying, well, who can judge this, who can judge that, etc.
Yeah, that's the thing that bothers me, is that you don't need someone else to tell you if you're a Muslim or not, right? Like, because it doesn't matter what other people think. Like, if they think you're not a Muslim, who gives a shit? Like, to be frank, like, it really doesn't matter. It's what you believe, and like what your faith is. So these questions of like, are you still a Muslim if you have sex, or if, you know, if you drink, I think are kind of stupid, to be honest with you, because no one gets to decide whether you're a Muslim or not besides you and God.
And we'll give the last word to Kais for tonight.
So just in relation to conversations about taboo things and also sex, I think it's mostly in the Afghan community. It's in relation to women, because as Nora John and Mitra brought it up, that it's a form of oppression, a form of policing, gendered policing, that have been continuously happening in our community, historically throughout a lot of communities, but specifically to Afghan communities, because even in Afghanistan, sex is very openly talked about among men in their own circles versus women, because then there's a lot of shaming, a lot of discrimination and alienation. And even here, even when families talk about, it's mostly in relation to their daughters, in relation to their sisters, whereas what men do is not questioned. And that's a very double standards of like thinking that like, oh, we shouldn't talk about these issues, but then when it comes only to females, the question, that's silence. But when it comes to men, in a lot of ways, they know that a lot of men do it. But for women, it's a continuity, because in a lot of societies, women are considered asexual. They have been sexualized. So for that sense, it's like the only times you can have sex is when you're married and you can have kids, and for reproduction purposes.
Right, they aren't afforded the same sexual identity or the same sexual privileges that men are, or that men afford themselves and then keep from women, either through their cultural actions or through policy decisions at the government level, things like that. So I thank you for bringing that up. That's a super crucial point. And see, this is why having discussions with the Samovar Network, watching the Samovar Network is important, because we talk about things like alcohol and we talk about sex. But regardless, thank you so much for the panelists for being here. I think we did a serviceable job of discussing faith and the Afghan identity. We will do a better job with including other voices, varied voices, the Afghan Hindus, the Afghan Jews, the Afghan Christians, the Afghan atheists that exist within our community. I again want to note that they were absent here and we want to include them. But thank you, Nora, thank you, Mitra, thank you, Diz, and thank you, Kais John, for being here and taking a stab at digging into these greater truths. You can catch TSN on Facebook. We also have a Twitter that Ali has been manning. So thank you, Ali Olami, for that. And thank you, Omar Aziz, for manning our Facebook page. Thank you to everybody who has been participating in our polls. We love our fans and our audience, and we love engaging with you because you all are hella smart. So find us on Facebook, find us on Twitter, and find us on the web. Just search Google for the Samovar Network. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next month.